I'm here today with Kash Patel, a former national security expert in counterterrorism. Spent the majority of his career in counterterrorism. Welcome to the show, my friend. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate being afforded an opportunity to talk with Grunstyle. For me, it's a little odd because I've worn your t-shirts and your clothing and sort of supported the brand for so many years. And then you guys came calling and said you actually wanted to speak to me. So I was like, am I being punked? But I'm excited. Thanks for doing this.
So I
really
think
appreciate it.
Absolutely. The honor is completely on this side of the table, being across the side from such an incredible individual like yourself that has done such great things for our country. And a lot of working behind the scenes and doing things that are more of the dirty work of it, I would say, right? And chasing this country's enemies and really putting the hammer down on them. Thank you for joining us today. We got a lot of things to talk about, and it's gonna be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And we want to share a lot of things with our viewers. But I think a lot of it, let's start at the beginning. How did your career start?
Oof, man, yeah. So way back in the day, I went to law school and thought that would be a really cool idea, and wanted to be the guy in suits, Harvey running around making big bucks.
Right.
That best laid plans. I became a public defender in Miami, and then I did that for a while, tried a lot of cases, and ended up becoming a terrorism prosecutor at the Department of Justice, which was great. Prosecuting terrorists all over America, outside our borders, in theaters of war is a great time. And then I went to JSOC as a rep for D.O.J, doing targeting operations with our Tier 1 Special Forces guys. So, I mean, throw a kid from New York into the middle of this mix, and you're like, you see kill TV everywhere, you're adjusting the rack and stack, and you're like, who do we kill next? What hostage do we get? I mean, it's pretty amazing to be a very small piece of that apparatus. From there, I went to the House Intelligence Committee, when Devin Nunes was the chairman. I ran two things. I ran the Russiagate investigation, and then I also was the national security advisor running national security counterterrorism related oversight for our programs overseas. And then I ended up in the White House at the National Security Council. Eventually made it to principal deputy at the Office of Director of National Intelligence, so the number 2 over there. And then they kept running out of guys, so they made me chief of staff at D.O.D.
Running out of guys, like chewing through them, or how does that look?
No, I mean, I say that sort of like half jokingly. It's basically what I've always said was, and I was in government for 16 years, and I spent more time in the Obama administration's executive branch than I did under Trump. And it's just, it's the next man up. If they ask you to do a job, you follow chain of command. Right. And so I thought I had the job I wanted. The dream job was running counterterrorism for White House. That's what I was doing for President Trump. And then they just said, hey, look, you're doing a great job there, but we need to fill this role. Would you serve in that capacity? And who's going to say no to running the Department of Defense?
Sure, absolutely.
Maybe I should have, but
yeah, right on. Now, you're working on both sides of that administration, right? Obama was pretty aggressive when it came to counterterrorism, right?
Sure.
I mean, that's undeniable.
No, absolutely. My first round in JSOC was largely under the Obama administration, and our kinetic program, we got after it. Right. There wasn't much restraint, so I have to agree with you on that. In terms of that portion of national security, we were able to get after the target.
Absolutely. Now, in comparison between the two administrations, being on both sides of that, where do you feel like you've made the most impacts?
Well, I mean, look, like yourself, anyone that served, when you're at the operational level, you're just feeling like you're in the game, you're making the most impact when you're doing the targeting, when you're doing the war fighting, when you're at the tip of the spear. And then as your career advances unplanned, I didn't think that I would end up where I ended up. And then you're sort of from the top setting the larger scale operational policy and where we're going to go and where we're not going to go, who we're going to attack, who we're not going to get the attack. And so I think it's a trade-off. I loved my time at JSOC on the ground, but my time running the Department of Defense was the best in my service.
Absolutely. Now, as a civilian working within that Tier 1 group, what was that like?
I was basically just trying to touch the magic every day, as my buddies would tell me. They didn't treat anyone differently. You just showed up, and the ethos at JSOC, at least at the time, was add value and get me to yes, lawfully, but add value and get me to yes. And that sort of stuck with me throughout my career is, that's what we should be doing. If we can lawfully get to X on the target, then let's do that. And how do I, as a small nub in that chain, add value to do so.
Yeah.
But I tried to remind myself that's what I needed to be doing.
Absolutely, and I love that idea of give me the yes, right?
Yeah.
And because we imply that in our business a lot is never, no is never something that we should be using in our lexicon, right? Is how do we get there, and what do we need to do? What are the obstacles, and what do we need to negotiate? And I find that fascinating because there's a lot of businesses out there that just or organizations and institutions, right, that will just take no and be like, okay, we'll do something else.
Well, unfortunately, a lot of folks in government took that approach, and in the national security arena, I can't speak for, EPA or Treasury or whatnot, but in national security, getting to yes was: are we going to take out these top terrorists? Are we going to kill them? Are we going to do a raid? Are we going to capture them? Are we going to go get an American hostage? There was, to me, it was unacceptable to get to no, because then you failed the mission,
Right.
and that just hurts our national security. So, and when we ran into people along the way in government who just said, well, it was amazing to me how much no we faced. The headwinds were like, we shouldn't do this, we shouldn't do that. Here's a reason why not to. And I was like, what about the reasons to say yes?
Right.
And I think I always tried to be on that side of the equation, and I was in the minority.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's tough, right? And I've read an article that you were once considered, or still considered, one of the most knowledgeable men in counterterrorism in the United States government.
I pay people well to like me.
Right on. And so some of the bigger things that you worked in on that side, or even further into the progress of your career, were some of the strikes on like Soleimani, al-Baghdadi. I'm fascinated with the al-Baghdadi side because I fought in Iraq, and I saw the dichotomy of how the culture worked, and how the locals were working in regards to the insurgency that was happening from the outside areas and ISIS. What could you walk us through a little bit of like that whole Baghdadi? In which you can.
I don't know if I've ever really talked about that, actually, so I guess we'll give it a go. That, as you know, is an operation that just takes months and months and months of collecting intel, getting it right, doing reps and sets, and making sure you're perfect. You have to be perfect on that day. So on the day in question, it was actually a Saturday. So I roll in jean like this to the White House, because that's the only day you're allowed to do that. And basically, you got this feeling. I was talking to all the leadership, and I was like, well, we might actually do this today, because we had done it so many times. We're like, yeah, right, we're going again.
Yeah.
Might not happen. And then put on the emergency suit. I was at the time Senior Director of Counterterrorism at the White House. It's pretty amazing to see the U.S. apparatus come together. The president convened the National Security Council. So you're in there with the Secretary of Defense, the chairman, the National Security Advisor,
Wow.
Me, none of, probably should have just been making coffee at that point. But what happens is the chain of command has to make a decision, and only the president can say yes or no. He was briefed. He said, we're going to go. They shut down the compound, the compound being the White House, because the president and the vice president were in the same place at the same time for an extended period of time. So they locked us down in there, and we were in the Situation Room. And when it came time to, because there's the line of basically you have to go or no go. And the president was just the entire time. President Trump was like, we're going, because we promised the families of the individuals that were not just the military families, but the civilian families of their kids that were beheaded by ISIS. They were journalists, they were humanitarian workers. And he was like, we're going unless there's an operational necessity not to go, meaning possibility. There's always a possibility of a casualty in an operation like that, but can we calculate and prep for it? And we did. And it was, standing next to the president after he called the signal jackpot was like, the greatest day ever. We were just taking out Soleimani. And then, to his credit, President Trump didn't just finish the operation and call it a night. He said, I want to call every ground level commander myself and thank them for what they did tonight. But more importantly to me, he called the families of the Kassigs, the Sotlofs, the Foleys, and the Muellers. And we had developed a relationship with them, having worked with them for so long, because they were the 4 highest profile families that had to deal with what Baghdadi inflicted. And that was just like an emotional moment. I was like, wow, the commander-in-chief wants to take time to do that.
Right.
And it was pretty amazing.
Yeah, I can only imagine how those families felt getting a call from the POTUS,
Yeah.
with that incredible news.
Yeah, I said, I'm going to call you, but I think you're going to get a better call.
Right.
So,
Right. Now, if I remember correctly, Baghdadi was killed by a dog, right?
yeah.
What better way? Because again, in that culture, like dogs are really well respected in Iraq, and to die by a dog.
Yeah, he was chased down the hallway, and he locked himself in. Baghdadi, as the president said, as a coward, he locked himself in and shielded himself with his minor children.
Yeah.
And that's how it ended.
Yeah. Now, after his death, what did you start seeing in the ISIS leadership? Was it a systematic fall of the leadership, or were you guys still target acquisition?
Wow, great question. So unlike when Osama bin Laden was taken out and there was sort of a natural plug from the number two, who was the guy, Ayman al-Zawahiri, who's still alive,
Right.
a pretty big target. He started al-Qaeda, brought UBL in, and then when UBL was killed, he sort of took over.
Sure.
That scenario didn't necessarily translate in ISIS land. So there was people vying for the top job. There was all these emirs, a couple of deputies. So they had to sort out amongst themselves who was actually going to get it. And President Trump didn't stop. He says, I don't care which one of these guys takes the next rung up to run ISIS. We're taking them all out.
Yeah.
And we did take them all out. It didn't get a lot of press coverage, but we took out a lot of bad dudes because the president didn't stop going.
Right.
It was pretty amazing. You take out, people don't realize this. We took out Baghdadi on Halloween of 2020. We killed Soleimani on New Year's Day or like the day after of 2021.
Right.
That's a pretty kinetic window, a pretty advanced kinetic window for that amount of time. And in between, there was a lot of other high-value targets taken out.
Right, and it was a major collapse of that network, right? Because we all know that the Iranians were supporting the insurgency through the entire time. Getting Soleimani was like, wow, probably one of the biggest target acquisitions of the war outside of Zarqawi, Baghdadi, that had probably the biggest influence on stabilization of the zone.
Yeah, and a lot of people, look, I worked more personally on the Baghdadi stuff than I did the Soleimani stuff. And a lot of people in government had said, and around the world have said, the Soleimani hit was bigger than the Baghdadi hit in some ways. And in a lot of ways, they're right. I mean, Soleimani was responsible, as you know, for more American soldier casualties than any one human being on planet Earth. That's saying something. He was also the Ayatollah's #1 go-to gangster to inflict pain on America wherever. Iraq through the Shia militia groups, Afghanistan, Somalia, Yemen. People don't talk about that, but you know how operational Iran is in Yemen, Africa. I mean, this guy just didn't stop killing and maiming Americans and American soldiers. And the audacity for a president of the United States to come in and say, we're going to take him out in Iraq as he's basically getting off a plane is just unreal.
It was beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, that's the word. It was beautiful.
Right, as somebody that was watching it on TV, I'm like, we just hit this guy on, what was that, Round Irish?
Yeah. And then you see the finger with the ring and people are like, oh, and I'm like, no, that to me was like the greatest photo to come out of that strike because it just represented that President Trump was willing to go to the max on national security. And that's the world I lived in. So for me to have a chain of command that said, we are going to keep going was pretty awesome to be a part of.
Right. And so you take a look at those operations, and then you fast forward, right? Fast forward into Afghanistan.
Yeah.
What we saw at just in August.
Yeah.
And it's a hot subject for everybody, right? And especially within the military community. A lot of 3.5 million veterans have rotated in and out of Iraq and Afghanistan. That's very personal. 20 years of combat. And you have an individual that in President Trump that was so Operation Forward in terms of going after our enemies. In this administration that's coming in and did exactly the opposite, it seems like, in many respects. And I'm an outsider looking in. I don't have that knowledge, right, other than what I read in a gaslighting news media that was favoring one side and the other. But like when it comes to like the exit of Afghanistan, what the hell happened?
Well, that one's like, as you said, that one's really personal, right? Having been over in Afghanistan, having served there, having so many brothers and sisters that served there, some died there, having buried them here at Arlington. I mean, Doing a dignified transfer is the hardest thing I've ever had to do in government service. And I was in the Oval with the president, and he had to sign the letters of the fallen. And he literally, I've never seen President Trump, animated is not the right word, and it was slightly emotional. And he just said, I don't ever want to sign another one of these letters ever again. When are we going to stop getting our men and women killed in wars that we shouldn't be in? And look, that was, whether you agree with him or not,
Sure.
he ran on ending the forever wars. That wasn't really popular in the Republican circle. I'm a Republican, right? But that check, Commander-in-Chief said, we're ending the forever wars. And his secretaries of defenses just didn't do it. You know, the ones that he ended up letting go. And then he turned to me, and acting Secretary of Defense Miller, and said, get me out of Afghanistan. Get us out of Somalia and Iraq and Syria. I ran on this. The American people elected me on, that's the political side of it. Whatever you tell us we're going to do. And so, but we came up with a conditions-based withdrawal. We said, as you said, 3.5 million rotations, millions more families impacted by Afghan service, blood and treasure spent in that country, everything from extortion 17 on down, like the biggest mass fatality in Special Forces history. So I wanted to do it right, and so did he, and so did Acting Secretary of Defense. So we crafted a conditions-based plan. We said, we're going to hand it off because you can't withdraw to Afghanistan in 3 months, but we're going to hand it off to the incoming administration. But it's pretty simple. Keep Bagram.
Yes.
You don't have to be a military man or woman to know you have to keep your command and control node. Why? Because you have to keep your allies in country, you have to keep a special forces mission in country, and you have to keep a predator program in country. You cannot complete that task by over-the-horizon capabilities. It just sounds cool and it doesn't work. And not to mention the 7,000 detainees that were in Bagram. The rest of it was pretty simple. On the diplomatic side, right? Secretary of State, then Pompeo and company were doing the negotiations with the Taliban and the government and the regime and things like that. But we made sure they reputed al-Qaeda. And during our tenure, for 18 months, there was not one U.S. casualty, which I think is probably the thing I'm most proud of. But that's amazing to be able to accomplish that feat, get people to the table and negotiate. And they knew President Trump's bite came with a kick, right? Like they knew if you attacked an American soldier, and this happened about 22 months before the end of his term, an American soldier was attacked and killed, and he said, go. And we did, and that ended the sort of ISIS-K, al-Qaeda operations in country against U.S. personnel. So it was extremely personal. And then we were successful in the sort of getting it off the ground and started reducing our manning and our footprint, and then taking on our weaponry and all that stuff. But one of the things I don't talk about often is the transition. And our orders were simple. I don't care. I don't have a say in the election outside of what my vote is. The chain of command said, we're transitioning power to the Biden administration. DOD is the most important mission. Transition. We did that. We gave them our blueprint. We gave them our plans. We called everybody that was coming in. No one called us back. We said, you don't have to call it the Trump plan. You call it the Biden plan. You can call it the America plan. Whatever. Call it whatever you want. But some things worked. Here's the intelligence. Keep planning based on the intel on the ground. And they just lit it on fire, unfortunately. And the thing that pisses me off the most is the 13 guys that we lost. And we lost them because Biden said, we're giving up Bagram. The bomber came out of detention in Bagram jail. It's that simple. And then the disgusting action of taking a drone strike and killing children in supposed response to that, and thumping your chest for 2 weeks. And you know this, and I know this. If you hit the X when it comes off the rails. It doesn't take you 2 weeks. And they just buried it, and the media allowed them to bury it. And we come to find out that it wasn't the bomber that got killed. It was 7 children and other innocents. And that's just, that's tragedy for everybody.
And nobody's being held accountable.
Nobody. Right.
And then, and what did we think was going to happen when we let those detainees out, right? Or they, I'm sorry, we didn't let them out. We just left in the middle of the night.
Literally left and turned the key and said,
right. And then the next thing you know, we got the Haqqani network that is providing security around Bagram, or around KIA or KIA. What the hell did we think was going to happen?
And you know this, right? And I'm so glad you brought this up. The Haqqani network, they were Osama bin Laden's bodyguards.
Right.
That's who this guy used. The world's biggest terrorist in modern history was guarded by the Haqqani network. This same group was now in charge of security around Kabul, KIA. To which the White House under the Biden administration told American citizens in country, and that was the other thing I forgot to mention, President Trump was like, get every American out. That is the first and only responsibility. And until we do that, we won't go down the TikTok of what we do next. And we ran out of time, but we said there's still Americans left. At least my count was over 1,000. And then they take the podium at the White House, and Jen Psaki says, well, we've texted and emailed everybody in country, and we've asked them to come to Kabul. You've asked a civilian who's been in Afghanistan for 5+ years to traverse a war-torn nation and come to the gates of literally hell,
Right.
break through the Haqqani territory, and then if they get through the gate, then we'll put them on a plane.
Right.
I mean, that's just so offensively outrageous.
While the Americans are being told to weld every gate shut.
Yeah.
Right? And creating more obstacles for these same Americans to come and try to get out of the country. And then we get gaslit some more, right? We get gaslit in the sense of, oh, well, the Russians, right? The Russians are here, paying for the death of Americans. Well, in 18 months, there was no death of Americans. So what the hell are you guys talking about?
Right. The bounty gate, the Russia bounty gate nonsense. I was the principal deputy at DNI when that quote unquote scandal broke. Classified information was released to help a political narrative, which was totally false. I mean, do you think President Trump, if the actual intelligence was Putin was being paid to kill Americans or paying Al-Qaeda or terrorists to kill American soldiers, you would think President Trump would have acted? And we fast forward into the Biden administration, and they of course send this one pager that says, oh, that reporting was false.
Yeah.
We knew it was false. So I was the PDD&I
Right.
at the acting, and why do you think we didn't do anything? But they wanted a narrative against the president. And that's what divides the military against the American population. And that should just never, never happen. I mean, having Afghans fall out of C-17s to their death
Right.
is just unthinkable. I mean, there's not even movies in which that happens.
Right.
And it's just tragic. It's the ultimate tragedy. And I hate to say this, and I've been saying it a little bit, but the United States will find themselves back in Afghanistan inside of 2 years.
I believe it. Like, we've left $85 million or $1 billion, right, worth of equipment. Where does that all go? Well, I know where it's going. It's going right into Pakistan.
Yeah, and you brought up a great point. The Russians and the Chinese are always looking to take advantages of our screw-ups, right? Afghanistan is the perfect example. The second we left, they came in, Russia and China together, and were literally fast roping their guys down into country, into our buildings, and saying, we're going to go take all this equipment because they're going to exploit it, use it against us. But more importantly, they were already starting mineral mining operations in Afghanistan because they do that everywhere else.
Right.
They're going to dig that country dry, not give any to the Afghans, and use it against America. And it cost them nothing. They just waited for the stupidity of the withdrawal, which turned into an evacuation, and that should never have happened.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's shift gears a little bit and talk a little bit about national security, right? I think this was a good segue into it. When we're talking about China, right, the biggest threat to national security, in my opinion, right now. It's fascinating to me because it was during the Obama administration that we saw during the national debates, Obama check up on Mitt Romney when he said the 80s are calling, they want their Cold War back, right? And now all of a sudden Russia is the biggest enemy of America. That's all bullshit. We all know, right? And whatever's going on in the Ukrainian border, it's a
show.
It's a shit show, right?
Yeah.
But what is not is the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative.
Yeah.
Right? Can you talk a little bit about
that?
What's your thoughts there on national security implications?
So I agree with you. China is our biggest national security global threat. And Russia, and I'll say this, Russia's not far behind on some fronts. There's actually one or two minor areas where Russia I would put them ahead, but globally speaking, China's the biggest problem. And here's an example. So China has deployed these things called debt equity swaps around the world. And I've been on the ground in Africa from Mauritania to Namibia to D.O.J. over to Myanmar. What they do is they go into these countries and they say, we're going to build you these deep water ports, we're going to build you these mining operations, we're going to build you these railroads, we're going to pay for everything, and then you're going to pay us back and you're going to own it. And they know that, do you think a country like Mauritania can pay for a $10 billion deep water port?
I don't even know where Mauritania is.
Right, yeah, exactly.
And what's their GDP?
Right, but the Chinese are smart enough to know there's value in that, and they go in there and then they take it from the country when they can't pay up. And now China has a global mining operation or a global port operation that they can use to exploit against American interest. And people are like, well, it's Africa, what does it matter? I was like, We have missions. The U.S. has missions and stations and people and personnel in every one of those countries, strategically located now next to a Chinese operation. And that's just one example of how, and that's what China's going to do in Afghanistan, same thing. And that's just one example of how China is kicking our ass. The next is the South China Sea, space. I mean, look, China just, I think it was 3 weeks ago, was taking target practice in the South China Sea against model ships that had U.S. flags and insignia on them. How can that possibly be allowed to stand? It's just unbelievable to me that we as America would allow the Chinese to tell us and dictate to us what is and isn't good for American national security interests. And that's what I think China's unfortunately doing. Taiwan's another example, right? The NFL just came out with their latest boondoggle of Taiwan's part of China. I mean, what are you talking about? The NFL and Nike, all they care about is making money.
Yeah.
And now they've given Xi Jinping a platform to say, welcome into our country where we commit genocide and forced labor and detention camps and child enslavement. But NFL, Nike, you guys go ahead and make money. Just say it. Tell everybody Taiwan's a part of China.
It's crazy town, man. I don't get it. Like, where are all the smart people?
They're here. You're talking about it. People, your viewers are listening to it. They care about it. But what happens is, and this is a problem with the media, it's not a narrative that is popular with certain sectors of the media. So all they want to talk about is whatever is the next headline that people will read instead of the substance, which is, I'm glad you're bringing this stuff up because I do a lot of media. And this is some of the most substantive conversations I've ever had.
Oh, fantastic. Well, let's get deeper then.
Yeah, let's go.
You're talking about the deep water ports that are happening. They're just putting a deep water port on the west side of Africa, right? That gives China the opportunity of the Atlantic position, right? You're seeing the Marine Corps, repositioning itself and potentially putting its operations into the northern parts of Australia, giving up its tank division, right? Why are they doing that? Well, it's because I think that we're positioning ourselves for a big naval battle that's quickly coming. It's on the horizon.
Yeah, the deep water. You're totally right, and I don't understand what level. I don't have access to any of the intel I used to have access to, and we always ran operations and policy based on intel of what we were actually able to collect, and that was something we focused on. But why is the Marine Corps getting rid of a tank division? What are we doing?
Right.
Like, I don't understand why we're not counteracting it. I know why it's not popular. Who cares about deep water ports on the west coast of Africa or the south coast of Africa or in the Middle East or in Myanmar? The media doesn't care.
Right.
The politicians certainly don't care. They will care when they utilize that infrastructure against American interests, and then they'll just blame someone.
Sure. Yeah.
And it's really just a tragedy. And I don't think this government is doing the high-level national security work it used to do.
Sure.
I just don't think we're doing it.
Yeah, and I think you're right because now you're seeing, Chinese companies, front companies of the Communist Party that are buying up massive amounts of acreage across the United States.
Yes, they did in Texas, right?
Yes. Why are we allowing that to happen?
Man, I wish I knew the answer. I mean, China's smart enough, and the difference between China and this, China and Russia versus the U.S. is they have no rules, they have no law, they have dictators, and they have whatever. They have an endless supply of money, and they can do whatever they want to do. So they come into America and start buying up large swaths of property next to U.S. military installations and the like, and we don't stop them.
Right.
And I don't know why. I wish I had the answer. There's no strategic interest for having China next to one of our largest military bases in Texas. I don't know. In my 16 years of service, I've never found one classified or unclassified for that to be a good thing for America.
Right, right. Now, with Xi Jinping, stepping into Mao-like opportunities, where he's going to be, the guy forever. What implications does that have towards, relationships between the United States and China? Like, I see this guy as, more hawkish than even Mao to some reasonable degree. He's just not killing his own people yet. He's killing all the Muslims in the western side of his country.
Right, the Uyghurs.
But, he's not killing anybody else just yet.
Yeah, look, first of all, I mean, the fact that guy's going to be around Xi Jinping for not years but decades should scare everyone that cares about global national security and sort of a global equalitarian state. He, as you said, he is committing genocide in Northwest China. Why the world doesn't care is beyond me. But that's not the only genocide he's committing. He has the Falun Gong over there, and he also has the whole Tibet deal. There's 3 levels of genocide that for some reason China has been able to overcome. And for the first time that I can recall, the Chinese government is dictating to the American commander-in-chief what the policy should and shouldn't be. The G7 or 20, whatever, the G whatever it is, from 2 months ago, the president of the United States went to this in the high time of COVID, in person, traveled to Europe to meet with global leaders. You know who sent backbenchers? China, Russia, Japan, and Mexico. Their premiers didn't even show up.
Right.
That's it. I mean, can you recall another time in global history when that has happened? They just don't respect the leadership here. And whether it's a Democratic or Republican leadership, I keep telling people, I'm the biggest cheerleader for Biden when it comes to national security. We have to win there. If we don't do that, then we lose. And we're losing on these fronts. And for the first time, China's taken target practice at our mock ships in the South China Sea. Nothing to see here. We're getting our asses handed to us in space. And people are like, oh, why is space important? It's, you know, not to use a corny term, but it literally is not the next frontier anymore. It's the now frontier. Between all the satellite systems that we have up there and all the security features that we have up there, to have Russia and China exert dominance in that space is, to me, just completely unacceptable and something we fought against. And Chinese domination underwater, same thing. They don't have rules. They don't care. Xi Jinping just knows this guy might only be here for 2, 3, 4 years. I'm going to be here for 30.
Yes. Yes. And, you know, so it's not a left, right, or center conversation. This is American conversation.
Right? I like that.
You know, and you, when we're seeing things where the ambassadors of China are sitting across from our ambassadors saying, you have no more power, your words have no meaning anymore. And, you know, that is, you know, blatantly China just sitting here and spitting in the face of America saying, test us, right? And I think that's what they want, right? They want something here. Is it a confrontation? Is it the dominance of an economic platform? You know, I don't know, because if we go back in time, we've kicked the shit out of China in every engagement that we've ever had, right?
True.
You know, from Dan Daly killing 200 of them by himself, to the exploits in Korea, where you know, Chesty Puller destroyed 7 divisions, right? You know, we know that American dominance in the military would still be able to, in my opinion, you know, crush the Chinese in many respects, but it's the blatancy of what the communist government is bringing forward that I find is to be totally egregious, and we just don't have a position on it. We're just letting them walk all over us.
That's it. And let's use Xi Jinping's own words. I forget if it was this year or last year. He basically said, anyone that says Taiwan is not a part of the CCP and the Chinese regime, Xi Jinping literally said, we will grind their bones to dust. That is the leader of China saying, anybody, me, American, whoever, anybody but the NFL and Nike, that says Taiwan is an independent country, we're going to come after you and grind your bones to dust. I mean, I don't know how that doesn't get any more coverage. It's insane to me. But he knows, Xi Jinping knows, he can get away with it. What I think he also knows is that the national security apparatus of the United States has been sort of tethered and downshifted, and they're not going to launch the strategic offenses we might have launched under another administration. Putting aside the amount of tariffs that President Trump had going against China, which actually crippled them because they can only manipulate their currency to so much. But it brought them to a position where we could at least have an adult conversation with them, and they knew we had measures in place that they couldn't overcome. Now they don't care. And people keep saying, oh, we don't want what I'm reading in the media, I think, is also slightly absurd. They're saying, well, we don't want to piss off the Chinese too much because they're going to invade Taiwan. And I would say to that, I was like, have you guys looked at a map recently? Like, you can't land invade Taiwan. First of all, it's an island. Second of all, when you run into Taiwan, you have to go up 3,000 feet. It's not Normandy. You can't invade it. You have to either attack it by submarines and missiles and things like that. So this whole fiction of China doing a land invasion of Taiwan needs to be, you know, just excised. But the narrative is, and China has been successful in feeding this to the world, we might just invade Taiwan if you piss us off.
Yeah, and then you got Americans like John Cena that are like capitulating.
Oh yeah,
bullshit
in Chinese or Mandarin or whatever the hell he said.
Right. It completely blows my mind. Shifting a little bit more gears from the national security side, into we're talking a little bit about American intelligence. You have a lot of history there, right? In terms of the civilian side of the or the intelligence community versus the D.O.D. side
Yeah.
of intelligence community. Can talk us a little bit through what you guys were doing in trying to bring the needle back, right? Because long are the days of the OSS when it was all within the DoD, right? Now we have this massive branch of outside bureaucrats that are running the intelligence community, and maybe it doesn't run in line with the DoD, but I think you're the expert there.
No, I mean, I'll tell you my thoughts. So, being an ops guy on the civilian side at JSOC, you were an intel guy, right? Being a terrorism prosecutor, you were an intel guy with the ops level stuff. And so you saw how to consume, how to create, and how to deploy intelligence in kinetic fashion and prosecutions and things like that. So I got a pretty good understanding for it. But what I tell the American people now is, once I became the principal deputy over at the Office of Director of National Intelligence, our IC, our intelligence community, has 17 departments and agencies in it. The ODNI is just sort of the head of it. And like anything else, we only have a certain number of manning, certain number of billets to do the mission of the IC. So we, under Acting Director Grinnell and I, reset what we call our intelligence priorities to collect against Russia, China, Iran, terrorism, things like that. Why do we do that? Because we want our intelligence community operators to go out and collect against those targets. They get that signal from us. What this administration does, and I'll just give you a quick example, is they have said the number one priority in the Department of Defense, which is a member of the intelligence community, is white rage and white supremacy in the Pentagon. Now, let's just put aside the fact that that's a total fiction. You know that, I know that, we served, and it's ridiculous. But what they're saying from a policy level direction is the chain of command has spoken, this is what we're forcing our people to collect on. So what we're not collecting on? Russia, China, Iran, counterterrorism, because you can't do both. You can't do everything. So that's how we shape the IC versus what I think they're doing to the IC. But another great point that you brought up, and I don't think I've ever talked about this either, is that the DoD has a role and the intelligence community has a role. The CIA, let's just take them for example, have a role. Go collect intelligence. That's what you do. You're the Central Intelligence Agency. You are not the Special Forces community. So stop trying to be like them. Now, I'm not saying there's not a complementary fashion where they have to coexist and live together, literally, they do. But the Department of Defense, and something we did under Acting Secretary Miller, was we took our billets, our manning back from people within the intelligence community and said, are you going to have them collect intelligence or conduct operations? Because if it's the latter, they're coming home.
Right.
If you want them, because they're trained to collect intelligence, that's why we've given them to you on loan. Now is a big fight because it always comes down to money. Who's paying for who? And everybody knows DOD's got the biggest budget on planet Earth. And these agencies, they had never been called to task. We called them to task. We said, we're taking them back and you're paying for these billets.
Yeah.
And guess what happened? They started collecting on intelligence.
That's crazy.
They started doing what they were supposed to be doing. Like,
right.
People keep thinking like UBL, right? The Bin Laden raid, it was a great collaboration between DOD and IC. Same with Baghdadi, same with Soleimani. But this illusion, this fiction that the intelligence community has a special forces capability to go out and replace and supplant the Department of Defense in JSOC is outrageous.
Yes.
And it's also illegal.
Right.
So a lot of Americans don't know that, but to fix that took a huge lift. And the fake news media came after me again when I was doing it because I was chief of staff or I was a principal deputy just because we were doing it. But in the end, if you ask the ground level operators, then the people who do the work, they were like, these are the right decisions. This is what we should be doing.
Absolutely. I think, we can go down this rabbit road or rabbit hole of, working alongside of those tiered people.
Yeah.
It's like, what are you guys doing? You're a bunch of assholes running around with guns. Like, what are you doing?
Right.
It's not your job.
This is what we train for. If
Right.
you can do this, come join the DOD.
Right.
There's no one way better or less to serve, right? I think personally, if you put on the uniform, that's the highest way to do it. But that's my opinion. But if some people don't have the physical capability to do that, there's 100,000 other ways to serve. You can do it at any department or agency in government. You can be a civilian. You can be at the intel community. You can be in the EPA. It doesn't matter. There's ways to serve. And for me, there's not necessarily one's more important than the other. And I think there was this competition created like, well, if you guys are doing this, then we can too. And I was like, that's just not how it works.
Right. Yeah. I think we all saw how that worked in Laos.
Right. Yeah. You don't do that again.
And that's the thing that I keep coming back to is like we continue to make these foolish decisions when we have a long history of what not to do, right? Bagram, right? We saw what the Russians did and how that whole thing collapsed when they left Bagram. Right? We just took over what they left behind, right? And we did the same exact thing, enabling these organizational groups to do things that there is not within the mission statement of what they're truly supposed to be doing. It's like we're enabling these problems for ourselves.
We are, and one of the things that I was attacked over was why under President Trump are you taking on these agencies and departments and mandating that or trying to get them to do what their traditional roles was? And I said, because the commander-in-chief said so. And so I would go back to them and I said, why are you not following the chain of command?
Right.
I mean, that was one of the most outrageous things I had to experience in the Trump administration was, I don't care whether you agreed or not with President, that's not, you can have your opinion. But once the chain of command speaks, we act unless it's unlawful. And it wasn't unlawful. You just disliked it.
Right.
So these, I hate to use the term deep staters, but they existed. And Russiagate is a perfect example. They just thought, well, forget this guy. We're going to go and do what we think is right for the American people, not the duly elected president of the United States. I mean, just think of that. Think about, I served in the Obama administration, but like you said, on national security, it was, pretty even keel. I disagreed with some of them. I disagreed with how we handled Benghazi. I was one of the lead prosecutors for Benghazi. But when they spoke, I said, this is my opinion. They made the decision. We went forward.
Right.
That's how it's supposed to work.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, when it comes to bureaucrats within the deep state, right? You got to see it firsthand, right? You had to navigate through it, and it's thick, right? It's real thick. What are some of the security implications that you see with these bureaucrats in these types of positions that are putting the power of government before the power of people?
That's the best way to put it. That's exactly what they're doing. And Chairman Milley is the perfect example of the individual who puts the mission before everything else. He basically thinks, he and so many others think the mission exists to serve them. No, you exist to serve the mission, period. There is no other mission. And when they get together and think, and I saw this firsthand, them sitting in rooms saying, well, President said X, but we're not going to do it. I mean, I don't understand. I ran the interagency process on the National Security Council for Counterterrorism. That's what I'm referring to here. And we would say the president's national security priorities, really simple. Kill al-Qaeda senior leadership, decimate the emirs of ISIS, bring home American hostages, and basically take on Iran, right? Okay, got it. When we went to implement those, the deep staters at the random agencies would stand up and say, well, we don't have the intel to support that, or, so-and-so is gonna have to go talk to the president. And I said, okay, I'll just put you on the phone with him.
Right.
And they were like, whoa, we can't do that. And I was like, you can't follow a lawful order in the chain of command? And that's what I tried to implement. I said, I'm here, I'm not making this up. Whether I agree with it or not is irrelevant. Decision made, action needs to be taken, you're getting in the way. Do you have a lawful reason that you're getting in the way, or is it political? And then the leaks would start, right? Then the personal attacks would continue. Kash Patel is a genocidal dictator. Literally had someone in the media call me that. And I didn't care what they said about me, because like and literally 99% of the people who serve put the mission first. And it didn't matter what they were saying about us personally. Usually they never spoke about us. Right. That was the crazy other thing. They would cite us by name and have anonymous sources saying Kash Patel is trying to overthrow the government. It was like, I don't even know what that would look like.
Right. Yeah, I was reading an article that was written about you as I was doing some show prep. And everybody in that article was an anonymous provider of information.
Of course.
It's like, where have we gotten as a country that yellow journalism like this is being accepted, and the editors that are sitting in these positions are allowing uncredited conversations to be exploited and put out into the atmosphere or for people to consume?
Well, that's why I started Fight with Kash. Like, as the lead Russiagate investigator under Chairman Nunes, no one thought the Russiagate investigation 5 years ago would go the way it went,
Sure.
right? And become the biggest political scandal in U.S. history and the biggest, corruption by the FBI, D.O.J, and some members of the IC to unlawfully surveil a president and a candidate for president. And the media just lost it. They started coming after us personally, and Chairman Nunes personally. Personal attacks were one thing, then they started to defame us. They started to just outright lie based on anonymous sources, making up meetings, saying things we've never even done or operations we ever conducted or positions we ever held. So we started suing. I'm suing Politico, Times, and CNN for $150 million for defamation. Those cases are ongoing. And I know I wasn't the only one that happened to. So when I went around the country after I left government, people would come up to me and be like, just you were talking about, I can't trust the media anymore. They defamed me, they deplatformed me, but I don't have the means to go out and have my day in court and correct my name and my family's reputation. So I started fightwithcash.com. We go around the country, we raise the money, we have a team of lawyers, and basically we will review your case for free. And if you have a viable case, I'll pay the attorney fee for you to go in court and have your day in court. We don't want anything in return. We just want people to go out there and help us raise awareness for Fight with Cash, and if they can, donate. And that's literally what they're doing. We don't take any money.
Yeah, that's fantastic because it's a real thing, right? They're just continuing to drop, drag, and remove opposition, right? Anybody that has a voice that's speaking from truth, right? And it doesn't fit the box or the narrative of what is, being shaped into the conditioning of Americans, right? They just want to destroy it.
But and you're totally right. And so many people that you go around the country and you talk to a lot of people, just like we do. Most people just stop reading the media.
Yeah.
They just left or right. They just stopped. I mean, that's harmful to America. That's harmful, not just our national security interests, but our discussion in general. And so the only way to restore credibility, that's what I'm trying to do, is you have to go after and call out the people who have caused everyone to stop reading the media and stop watching TV because of the lies. And the only reason, or the only way they recognize that, is by a silver bullet to their bottom line. You know that and I know that, but that takes time and money. And so that's what we're fighting for. That's my biggest sort of project that I'm working on right now.
Yeah.
And, we'll take all the support we can get. Plus we got all this merch.
Yeah.
A Christmas sale going on. So check it out. And all the money goes right back into the trust.
With that being said, how can we support, and how can people that are listening support Fight with Cash?
I really appreciate that. If all your viewers could go online and check out fightwithcash.com with a K, and just donate if you can, tell 3 different people about it. All of our contents all of the content that I do in the media is on there for free. I'll put this interview with your permission on the website. We have thousands of people that follow us and donate to our causes. And then we have a whole merchandise store. I will say this, it's not quite grunt style level good stuff, but you can buy some pretty cool swag like the jacket and the hat that I'm wearing and other things. And all that money is a way to get the movement further and further recognition. And more importantly, you can message me directly. If you've been defamed or you've been deplatformed, we will look at your case for free. And if there's a viable cause of action, we will contact you again and say, here's an attorney for you. Here's a retainer check. If you'd like your day in court, we're going to pay for it.
And I think it's important because, I unfortunately think this is going to continue to get worse, right? Because we're living in a technocracy, right? In many respects.
Sure.
That is very leveled in fascism, right? Where, these big conglomerates of digital media are controlling the message, right? And they're working hand in hand with, bad actors in government. They're just censoring people because they have an opposing view that, is not rooted in what the messaging, they want the people to consume.
And all of a sudden that became acceptable.
Yeah.
Like, look, Facebook, Twitter, whatever other apparatus you want to talk about, they've all publicly admitted they're doing just that. They're censoring certain speech. They're kicking certain people off. They're shutting down certain fundraising apparatuses. Kyle Rittenhouse GoFundMe page was shut down because it was Kyle Rittenhouse's GoFundMe page. I mean, when did that become acceptable?
Right.
And that's what we're talking about here, and that's what we're trying to correct.
And even go as far as saying, all these fact checkers, right? Even the most prestigious and respectable organizations like AP, right? When I was going through college, it was AP was a certified truth teller, right? Now it's all gone. It's all gone. And now these, everybody's got their fact checkers, right? And, even Zuckerberg has come out on Testimony on the Hill saying, well, my fact checkers are just opinion-based.
Yeah, and that's what they are. I mean, the fact checkers, be it at the Washington Post or Facebook or whatever, They're paid to come out and just advance the political narrative they want to advance.
Right.
I don't recall in the last 5 years when they literally came out and said, well, here are the actual facts.
Right.
I mean, I hate to keep coming back to Russiagate, but now the Washington Post and CNN, who got Pulitzers, or the Times, I can't remember, everybody got a Pulitzer for their amazing reporting about the Russiagate scandal, which was a total lie. Now what they're doing is their fact checkers are coming out and patting themselves on the back and saying, we're calling ourselves out. You're not calling yourselves out. You're retracting pieces of an edit of a sentence that you wrote 5 years ago. Retract the whole article. Hand your Pulitzer back. Write an article telling the American public and the world how you lied through your anonymous reporting that you knew was bogus for 5 years. That would be accountability. But that accountability only comes from judicial decisions.
Yeah.
And that's why we're taking them to court.
Yeah, well, that's fantastic, and I think it's an admirable position that you find yourself in. It's and you're going to get beat up, by a lot of people because the message is strong, unfortunately, right? As we talk about what patriotism really is in this country, it's getting beat down to where patriotism is thought of as a negative thing, right? Where we are talking, one of the biggest offenses to me as a former Marine, who takes great pride in my service, is to watch the commandant of the Marine Corps come out right now and say, well, we need to be more diversified in our military services. Brother, sir, have you been down at the ground level of the Marine Corps? Like, it is one of the most diverse military services in all the 5 services that we have, 6 counting Space Force.
Don't forget, it's a lot of work to get us that.
Yeah, which again speaks to the next frontier of where we're going to be putting a lot of assets. Space.
Yeah, on the diversity thing, I'll just say that the fact that the United States Department of Defense is sort of forced to go out there and advertise for diversity, I think is ridiculous. Yeah. And the fact that some in the media have now taken to say we should change the testing requirements, let's call it the screening for certain groups and certain missions. We can't do that. I don't care if you're a man or a woman or whatever. If you meet the requirements and you want to serve, go serve. I don't care if you're blue, black, brown, purple, where your parents came, it doesn't matter. But we can't reduce our screening mechanisms just to satisfy a political narrative. I will never be for that. I mean, that harms the American national security more than anything else. And this sort of shows the complete hypocrisy of the media. Well, at least in my experience under President Trump, it was never, oh, you're a brown guy? We should do that. Well, let's do that. He never cared. Sure. Never cared. The 3 positions I held under President Trump, no minority has ever held them in the history of the United States government. I'm pretty proud of that, but he doesn't advertise it. I don't go around like the administration wasn't like, oh, let's go look for a minority and stick him in this position. Right. Are you qualified? Did you do the work?
Best person for the job.
I think I earned it. Yeah. The media doesn't, but who cares what they say? But that's akin to the D.O.D space when they're like, we need to be more diverse. I don't know what that means. Do you want us to be weaker just to satisfy a political narrative? Or should we go out and recruit and say, these are the testing requirements. If you can do this, you're in.
Right. One of the things that I enjoyed watching, from the sideline was, towards the end of the administration, you were the chief of staff for Chris Miller.
Yeah. Right.
Chris Miller's a great man. I've never had the pleasure of meeting him.
We'll fix that.
But understanding that we had a pipe hitter, sitting in that position.
Yeah.
And then, coupled by yourself that, has, a litany of things that you should be proud of. And then you had Ezra Cohen Watnick, another individual that had come from the intelligence side that was doing great things. Like, I would be so bold as there was a bit of a trifecta there that was doing great things for trying to right the position of government and military.
Well, people said like, oh, well, why are you coming in at this point in time? And I was like, well, look, the decision makers decided. Chris and I have known each other a long time, former Army Special Forces operator, as you said, a pipe hitter, like a guy who went into Afghanistan, who went through K2.
Right.
We, these things, came full circle for us and we enacted on them. And we also said, well, we're not gonna stop putting the best people in positions that we need to adjudicate the Commander-in-Chief's mission. We run through the echo of the whistle. That's it. If we were going to swap out on January 20th, so be it. We weren't going to stop the transition. We weren't going to stop the budget process. We weren't going to stop Afghanistan, saving hostages, killing terrorists. It wasn't going to shut down. And under Chris's leadership, it didn't. And we put in a lot of people that we wanted to effectuate our mission. And one of the things I'm most proud of that gets no attention is K2.
Yeah. And
it was cool for Chris to come. He went into Afghanistan through K2 in Uzbekistan, like a radio biological wasteland. Literally, people don't know about it. For 20 years, our veterans who went through there have either died or suffered serious life-altering injuries that are permanent, and their families have as well. Normally, the veterans would come in, the Veterans Administration would come in and pay for a lot of those services and medical needs. But because K2 was never qualified in the proper verbiage at the time those people went through it in 2002, whatever it was back then, they got no benefits.
Right.
On the night of January 19th, if I recall correctly, Chris and I have been working for months on this initiative. We got across the finish line the fact that if you served a K2, you are now entitled to full benefits. You, your family, and anyone else that would normally have been entitled to, just like if you had served in Afghanistan and suffered an injury or a medical injury or a biological injury later on.
Right.
We got that across the finish line. And that should be apolitical. And people are like, why are you wasting your time on K2? And I was like, because it matters. Call one of the families who's now getting treatment because of it.
And it's, my hat's off to you on that. Like, I would say that is probably, in my opinion, dealing with a lot of the toxic exposure stuff that is currently affecting our community. It's probably one of the biggest things I would look at and say, well done, sir, well done, right? And because it's gone for too long dismissed, where, I can speak for myself. My colonel's dead, my XO's dead, my best friend is dead. There's probably 40 people within my unit that have cancer. I am suffering from, some exposure related things myself, right? And Will Thompson just died last night. Wes Black has died. All these big people that that Congress want to parade around and say, well, but they're not doing anything, right? And you got President Biden, whose son Bo had died from toxic exposure, right? And the best that he can do is like, well, we're going to put together a call center and we're going to do some more data research. Well, brother, there's people dying left and right. What are we doing?
And you don't need Chris and I showed you don't need congressional action. There are ways lawfully under the rules that exist with the budgetary discretion that you have to steer a movement to satisfy the needs of individuals who had toxic exposure. You can do that. Any DOD can do that. It doesn't have to be toxic exposure either. It can be, take your pick of tragedies, unfortunately. War is tragic and it leads to tragic events. We have to provide for them. And President Trump's theme was not just end the wars, but provide for the veterans.
Yeah.
Now, tomorrow, next week, next year, long after they're gone. After President Trump's gone. And we tried to do that. And it's unacceptable, it was to me, to Chris, to President Trump, and anyone else that we knew, that people would pass, people would suffer these grave illnesses, and they would not be cared for. So we tried to answer that call. And I think it's not about us. I want to, anyone watching, you can do it too. You can set up a movement. You can lobby the Defense Department or the intelligence community to take care of the people that put on the uniform, or the people that serve in a civilian capacity who are injured in the line of duty. It's doable.
Yeah, absolutely. Well done, sir. Well done. What is the last thing that you would say in this conversation to the viewers that are watching? Being a good steward of the country and the jobs and the roles that you've filled, and what you're currently doing to help Americans that are being sidelined by the fifth estate, as we'll call them. What message would you like to push through for everybody that's watching?
I mean, you have such, we were talking about this off camera a little bit. You have such a wide audience, such a diverse audience that's not hooked on to the 7 p.m. whatever channel news show you're watching and forced to watch about topics that almost nobody cares about unless you live in and around the Washington, D.C. area, right? No one cares but the politicians who are tweeting at each other and in Twitter wars, and no one cares about that because that doesn't impact the people in California and Texas, in Utah and Idaho and elsewhere, everywhere else. And so I would encourage them to watch your show, because this is one of the most substantive conversations I've had. And I've done over 150 media appearances. And 2, I'll come back if you let me, but I'll come down to Texas. But where I'd leave it is that if your audience wants to go out and find out what happened about a certain topic, there's a way to do it. They can get in touch with you. You can go to my website and literally message me directly about any topic, and I will try to educate you to the best of my ability. I have a show that I do, Cash's Corner, once a week, that we talk about national security, defense, law enforcement, intelligence matters. That's it. We don't talk about politics because I think the four things I cited are important to me in my background. And you're doing the same. You're carrying that level of knowledge and message out to the American people. And I think it's breaking through.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Because, there has to be a signal, right? And to drive people to say, put all that shit aside. We are a better country than what we're being told that who we are. And, it's got to be our voices or the voices of the willing to stand up and say, we're done hearing it and we're going to bring a different message. So Kash Patel, thank you for everything you've done. Thank you for your service to this country. I'd love to have you back because there's a lot of things I didn't get to touch on because I want to know what you got your medal for in the CIA and the special mission.
I'll definitely love to talk. I can now talk about that. So next time we'll definitely get into my adventures in Africa.
There you go. There you go. Fantastic. So everybody at home, make sure you check out fightwithkash.com. Check out the podcast as well. It's fascinating. I will be doing that myself. And all things with American Grit. Keep checking us out for more interesting conversations. And again, I just want to thank you for the time. I know that you're a man of many things and you get pulled in many directions. And just to have an hour with you has been a blessing.
It's a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you, sir.